Welcome everyone to the NeoNephos Community Call. Today we are going to be covering more general topics, not only about NeoNephos, also about how is the governance of a foundation under Linux Foundation eyes. And then we will have, of course, an update of the NeoNephos Foundation. So basically, here everyone is welcome to participate, to share any questions or concerns about how the governance of the foundation is set up, and also about the status of any of the project. If you are following a specific project, sometimes in these meetings we have a demos of project. We don't have it in this one because we want to cover this more general information because we got some questions in the last weeks. So for the reason we are going to be covering that. So I'm not sure who is going to start. If you are going to start, Christian, with
Yeah,
the
let me
first
get
update.
started. Yeah, I
Okay.
found the presentation. I have it already open.
Okay,
And
good.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, to sum it up, we have also every time the demo. Sometimes it's hard to urge the people from the project say, what updates can you present us? Do you have an update? And it's not easy every time. For next meetings, I think the next month we already have quite some topics. So stay tuned and join the community call. If you are around. Yeah, so I think what we want to do now is also to really start more engaging with the community, with the outreach of how to interact with community and prospect community members. So stay tuned. I think we this is the year we where we invest much more time into NeoNephos and also the community and the projects what they stand for. So yeah, I think Esther didn't say that yet. The antitrust policy, why is it going back? Yeah, antitrust policy. Just to let you know, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Esther. I will present the foundation update today. So yeah, basically we have a new member. It's called Cloud2Go. Hope I spelled that right. A new general member joining the foundation since 1st of May. So thanks for joining. Happy that you're on board. I'm not sure if someone as a representative is here. If not, we will do that in one of the next meetings we have. Yeah, I think what we are seeing is now we have such a big interest towards the foundation and the community. We are having a lot of talks, also now European projects who are interested in bringing a project towards NeoNephos as yeah, we want to have the mission statement, yeah, sovereign cloud infrastructure foundation in Europe. Yeah, that's what we are working on. For that, we also met with the governing board last week and tried to think of, okay, what do we want to achieve? This is, hope you can read it, our roadmap for yeah the rest of this year and the beginning of next year. So basically, we want to more centralize. Let me switch that to centralize more our events efforts that we can directly interact and also send projects better to conferences that we speak about what we are doing, because what we are doing is in my eyes important and we get really good feedback about it. But we definitely need to improve um, our outside view. Um, Maybe, Esther, could you mute that? That would be nice. Um, our outside view, and basically what we are currently doing, but not sharing right now, is that we are working on an additional logo for NeoNephos. This one, what you see here on the screen, is only text logo. We want to have our own icon, and also invest in a mascot later on this year. And yeah, also what's important for us is that we want to improve in the interaction of our general and associate members. which are currently on board of the foundation, that we get into better working mode. What we started initially when we founded the foundation is that we get every fifth general member a represented person joining the governing board to get to know, okay, what are the problems and ideas from each general member and associate member, and to get that feedback into our roadmap discussions and what we are working on. Um, so that's what we are starting also planning now in a new working group, ideating that together with Christian Behrendt, who is currently our general representative. Plus, since we are currently with Cloud2Go 19 members in the foundation, there should be two additional representatives being voted. Basically, from a logistical process, it's like that the Linux Foundation starts the voting in October. That's the annual process, how it looks like. Let me see if I can speed that process up. But basically, I want to see more interaction together with the community and the members. Because we should get some worthwhile when we invest so much time into the foundation. And that one topic which I'm really proud of and what we want to see is that we want to invest in a physical test lab only with the NeoNephos components what we are building, that we have a central point with a small demo data center, or maybe which we can also use in real life, um, with real hardware, and that we also can use that for organizing hackathons and everything else what is important for building up a community and ideating of these topics. We we have also now, I think that's what I shared in the last community meetings. We started our outreach committee, which invested in the planning of an ambassador program, where we, by the way, have one ambassador going live as a small prototype. And after we see how everything works out, we will also let you know and increase that ambassador program to the public, that everyone who wants to be an ambassador and fits to the requirements can be a part of that. Yeah. And what's also important to me is we have these projects like Gardener and so on, which are already mature. Um, and they are already used in production, not only at SAP in thousands of clusters, but also in a lot of other companies in production, mission critical. Um, and what we would like to see is that we do the open source way, do good, talk about it, and build that as a success story around it. Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to share. Besides that, I think what's also important for the community on a long term is how can engage, how can I benefit also from NeoNephos. And that's why we wanted to start with a conformance program and communization program. That we also see there's a need of hosting companies which want to apply NeoNephos, but the question is how and why. Why should we do that? How do we do that? These are the questions which we want to solve. These takes time, but it's definitely on our roadmap, and we want to work on that. And we also make clearer, often we get the question, okay, so what does NeoNephos stand for? Why aren't you directly in the CNCF? Because of our scope, that we want to drive that in a more directive way. Um, and and basically, yeah, we want to work on these vision, on our vision on that document, and explain it better on our website. That's something we want to improve. Uh, yeah, that's why we do that general outreach tasks, yeah, to get a better understanding on what does NeoNephos stands for, and how can we engage with that. And of course, since we do the planning of our events, um, we are also thinking already how do we attend the KubeCon next year. maybe having co-located events and inviting projects and people to talk about that topic. Maybe also for the Open Source Summit. That's currently what we are discussing. It's not finalized yet, but we just wanted to give you a glance of we are not just a foundation now and doing nothing. We want to achieve something and doing our best now to plan that accordingly. Yeah. So that's basically it here. Um, Going on the next slide. If yeah, PowerPoint lets me do that. Um, we are also working on our project lifecycle document. Um, this is something we wanted to already achieve quite some time ago. Generally, I think, yeah, coming together as a foundation, you need to start working together and learn how to work together with other companies, other interests and ideas. But we are closing now on that topic, and that project lifecycle policy will be finalized soon. One draft is already available. You can also contribute here. Everything is available. If you see something which is not available, but you would like to contribute and be a part of something, please let me know. I'm happy and I really want to live the open source way. So let me know that and yeah, I will improve the topics um, where we can do a better open source um, strategy. Yeah. Okay, that's to that. Um, and then just as one additional side remark, I will be on parental leave the next 3 months, and we have Orlin, who also freshly joined SAP, um, for replacing me during that time. And maybe Orlin, maybe do you want to say something about yourself? Now's the time.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I joined SAP just, I don't know, 2 months ago. Before that, I was part of the community team at SUSE, and before that, VMware for a while. Some of you, I can see some no names in the attendance today. I've been engaged with some CNCF projects for a while already, like Project Harbor, Valero, Contour, K3S. I'm also CNCF ambassador for the last 7 years, and I'm yeah heavily engaged into the technical communities around. So I hope I can bring some value here and help out with the NeoNephos.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
Good. Yeah, so basically I will be back mid of August, just to let you know. Yeah, then I would continue to the next slide. And that's basically already the presentation coming from Linux Foundation. Um, so I think we are also getting asked, or that's something I did in the beginning. Okay, so how does that governance look like normally when having a foundation like NeoNephos, and yeah, how can we contribute to that? Therefore, I would like to hand over to the community, to the Linux Foundation. Um, John, do you take care of that?
Sure, yeah, I
Yeah,
can present from my screen if that makes sense for
yeah.
y'all. Let me try to bring this up here. Uh, uh, 1 second, I gotta find the right tab here. Okay, hopefully you see something that says NeoNephos structure and governance on your screens. Awesome. Well, thank you, Christian, for the invite to talk here. I don't know, some of you I might know, some of you might not. My name is John Martic. I'm one of our program directors here at the Linux Foundation. I know you all have worked with Esther quite a bit. I sort of stepped in when she also went on parental leave, and she's back now and in full force and doing an amazing job here of supporting this group here. Um, One of the things that I do is I work across a number of our different foundations in both horizontal and vertical focuses. So I have a really nice view of what I've seen work, what hasn't, how these things work in a good capacity, areas where it makes sense to potentially take a look and adjust and things over time. And generally, a lot I come in and just help advise and give guidance to some of these groups. You all are the subject matter experts of this ecosystem of what you're looking to do. The pairing comes from us, and when I say us, I include Esther and some of our other LF staff as they engage, of how do you work in this model? Because this is a very unique model to work. Some of you have experience working in open source, but then just working in this sort of open collaboration environment can be very new. And our goal here at the Linux Foundation is to help you go through this process. You all set the decisions, you make the decision points, but we're here to help support you, and we're here to help give you the best guidance to work through it. So you'll probably remember at the beginning of the antitrust policy notice, we don't just put this here because our lawyers tell us to. I mean, they do, but that is not the main reason why. The main reason why is that this sets the context for how all of this collaboration works. By able to collaborate out in the open in an open manner, number one, it removes the needs for all of your various organizations to do, one-off agreements and things like that between another. The other is it helps work within various antitrust regulations globally that might exist here. So we always put this in here as a reminder to just, helping conduct your activities and whatnot. And again, Esther and myself are resources if your team has questions, and we could bring in LF legal counsel if needed. But more importantly, this is sort of the context that enables all of this to happen. So it's a really good always reminder to reflect upon. So from a high level, across, the Linux Foundation, we host over 1,400, I believe, open source projects currently. Many of those are arranged into what we kind of call an umbrella foundation, like NeoNephos is. And what we have found is that when you're looking at a successful open collaboration across the board, there's a lot of different factors, but it tends to kind of all bucket into these four different areas. Neutrality is probably one of the biggest reasons people bring projects here is they don't want any one company to own it. It's an asset, it's an important thing for an ecosystem to move forward. And by making sure that the ecosystem as a whole owns it, it is a true commons, that means no one organization can take it away. This even gets down to the fact of the contribution. So for all of the projects here at NeoNephos and in even more broader in the Linux Foundation and the Linux kernel works like this as well, if you make a contribution to a project, you're not signing over IP. You're not making an IP license. You're not doing any of those things. You own what you put in. That's sort of the nature of the developer certificate of origin that is used as is a part of the contribution mechanism. It's not a sign off, it's an attestation that just says you know where this code came from and you have the rights to contribute under this license. Why that becomes important? Because if the project would want to go change its licensing or do something different, everyone who's contributed to it has to sign off on it. So that's kind of the one control mechanism here that makes sure that these communities all align with the people that put the work in. The belief is you want to make the decisions, you show up and you do the work. You're the ones who carry water and chop wood. You do the work to make these things happen. And that helps define where these go. It's not some outside external force that has nothing to do with the day-to-day of the project. And that ties into the duocracy half of things. It's driven not from a stature as a company or a stature in an ecosystem. It's driven from the stature of the decisions are made by who does the work. That's a huge important thing because it connects back the people that really are invested in this by the fact that they're putting the effort in are the ones that are actually benefit or the ones that are actually saying where things go. The IP clarity is just a clear one, I think, for anybody these organizations when you use use these technologies. Both on the front end of what does it look like to become a contributor, but then also on the downstream end of what does it look like to use this software. What is the licensing? Is it all clean open source licensing? Is all of the necessary due diligence and provenance and things like that? That's something we take very seriously, and we put a lot of structures in place to make sure it's important. And then I think Christian really alluded to this really well is what does the downstream ecosystem looks like? The reality is the collaboration that projects like NeoNephos are doing is the idea that this is building an economic benefit for each of your organizations and the group as a whole. And that is a piece that we worked with these projects to have a keen eye of how that happens. Not only just for jobs and faster adoption, but then also just making sure that this takes the pace of the market of where things are going. And you might see this diagram in various different forms. It's one we talk about quite a bit of how projects kind of build this ecosystem. And it's a virtuous cycle of how this works. We really end up focusing quite a bit on our side on making sure you have a good running project. The governance is neutral, the IP is neutral, it has all of those clean things. We, from the Linux Foundation perspective, help support the ecosystem in doing the work that it needs to do. We don't write code, mostly because you don't want to see the code I write, so it's not going to be very good for you. But you also are the subject matter experts. You know it's important. We're the people that help support that. How this ends up working is that code goes out into ecosystems, out into your various different organizations. It's used in various different capacities. We often use the term productizing, but that doesn't necessarily mean making into a product. It could also just mean you're putting in production your systems. You're using it as a part of your build infrastructure. All those sorts of things. The success failure of that drives an economic benefit for each group. Is it able to save costs? Is it able to go to market faster? Is it able to address different market concerns? All of those things have economic benefits, and then companies recognize those and invest portions of those back into the project, and then that keeps this cycle completely going. And that's really the model that we seek to build here is this continuous cycle where we have solid projects that make business impact. Those business impacts have recognizable economic benefits, and companies reinvest that in funding or mostly developer resources, but also funding back into the projects, and this cycle continues. And that's really all we try to keep driving. We keep the pinwheel spinning, and if it's spinning, your projects are doing well. When one of the pieces starts falling off, that's when you kind of had to take a step back and see where the gap is and address that. So just about the Linux Foundation Europe. So, this project is hosted at the Linux Foundation Europe. It is a legal entity that we have headquartered in Brussels. I think of it as sort of not as separate than the Linux Foundation, but think of it more as a mission of the Linux Foundation. We have similar missions in Japan. We have a growing one in India, and I'm sure there's going to be more globally over time. The idea of this mission here is it's really to help be a conduit and support mechanism for the work that is happening in Europe, our members in Europe, with a keen eye towards the key concerns that are happening in the European audience. Any of our projects, any of the Linux Foundation projects, both Europe and globally, anyone can participate in. There's never any barrier of membership to participate in the technical work that is happening. You can go into Gardener right now and contribute code. You can go to a Cobalt Core TSC meeting. All of those things are open to anyone. And that's a keen part about, all of how our Linux Foundation projects work. Where the membership comes in and we'll talk about that in a little bit, is just that's kind of when you're doing sort of that investment and you're wanting to kind of have a say in sort of the overall financial and strategic investments from the foundation as a whole. And as we all know, this is where NeoNephos fits in. So NeoNephos sort of has a scope of work within how all this fits. So looking at kind of how this is all structured together here, there's really two key bodies that, and this is, by the way, how I would say the predominant number of our foundations that use what we call an umbrella model work. And even the ones that are kind of a single project, they use a variance, but the general auspice is the same. There's two key bodies of a technical advisory council, which kind of comes by different names. I think CNCF uses the term technical oversight committee, but it's a very similar function. We have some other foundations that use other similar terms there. And then a governing board. And both have different roles. The Technical Advisory Council is the group that is overseeing all of the technical investments and projects and work that is happening out there. So their main idea is they want to ensure that these communities in here can be successful. They align with the mission. They have an opportunity to cross collaborate, cross connect, kind of figure out what is needed for a group to be very successful in here from a technical perspective. As Christian was talking about, they maintain a project lifecycle, which the idea of that is not so much as a way to manage the details of these projects. All of these project communities are independent groups. They're autonomous. They make their own release schedules. They decide who their own contributors and committers are. They have sort of their own autonomy there. But where the technical advisory councils, it sets the tone of like what is sort of the maturity levels that these projects should be, living up to. What are the sort of aspects that they're looking at to say, hey, is this a early stage project? Is this a later stage project? What are the qualifications that looks at? And the technical advisory council applies that as a broad set across the board, and that's sort of where the life cycle comes in. And they're also sort of that conduit between these communities as they're looking at the governing board and trying to see, hey, we have budget strategy, other sort of needs there. They're that conduit that kind of comes back to the governing board. And as you can see here, then there's all the individual communities that sit underneath here. Those all have their own technical steering committees. They have their own day-to-day processes and policies and things like that. They're all bound by their own technical charter, which sort of defines how the auspice of where they all execute within and their IP policy. And then each of these groups, like I said, they have their own day-to-day processes they work through. The other side of it is the governing board. And so think of the governing board as kind of the business side of the house. So their primary things are they're looking at strategy, priorities, they're overseeing a budget. They're looking at sort of the legal and the overall governance of the foundation. So they're looking at a very high level across the board here and seeing, okay, we've defined the scope of what NeoNephos is and the work that is being done here. They're sort of helping assess, as that moving along, what does that look like? Do we need to have budget how does the budget tie into this? How does the initiatives that are sponsored and funding fit into this? How do, the various projects, fit into this as well? I mean, the governing board, has a little bit of an oversight on the life cycle and to a degree the developer communities, but more in sort of a fiduciary strategic sense, not as much as sort of a day-to-day technical merit sense, because that's more of where the technical advisory council comes into play. Part of where the governing board oversees is a lot of the marketing half of things. One thing that this group has spun out, and we see most of our groups do, is they sort of spin out the day-to-day activities of that into an outreach committee, which that is much more of a tactical group that goes in there and says, okay, what is our marketing plan? If we look at what the governing board's overall strategy is, what is our plan? What are the activities we're going to do? What are the events we should participate in? What is the content we should be driving? All of those sorts of things we see an outreach committee fit in. Oftentimes, as we see groups go over time, the governing board spins out additional committees for various sort of working topics. Might be related to membership. It might be related just, very, single-threaded things where the governing board sort of needs kind of a group to kind of dig more into and report back. So that's sort of how these fit. We purposely put the TAC and the governing board in the same line because they are peer groups to one another. There is a linkage where the technical advisory council chair, Florian Mueller, sits on the governing board as a representative over there. So that's sort of your linkage between. But don't think of either group as sort of sitting above one another. They sit very parallel. As you probably know, I'm from the United States, and the joke we used to have is, compare this to the various branches of the U.S. government, how they work together. But I think you all probably know that that's not really exactly working its way out these days. So, but in an ideal sense, that's how the U.S. Founding Fathers said it. That's kind of how this structure works. So, Tor, I see your hand up. Maybe if you want to, I think you have a question.
Yeah, how does Linux Foundation Europe and NeoNephos interact, if at all, with something like Linux Foundation Energy? There's a conference in September in Berlin organized by the Linux Foundation Energy, and I'm trying to figure out how sort of Linux Foundation Europe, NeoNephos, and LF Energy, how that all links together. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and actually I work with the team on the LF Energy project, so I'm kind of very familiar with the event, and I'll probably actually end up going this year. I missed last year's, unfortunately. So really, all of our foundations are welcome to work with one another in any capacity. We on the staff side can help be a lot of that conduit between it because we know a lot of the different folks, we know a lot of the different parties at play and things like that. Again, all of our events, you register, you show up. The most of them all have call for papers that you can participate in. Some of them might have different pieces, but each one works a little bit differently here. So, if it's something that NeoNephos would want to have a degree of participation in, we can help sort of make the connections, and then we can, between the groups, they can kind of work out of what that best looks like, whether it be talks, whether it be a sponsorship, whether it be some sort of side event. We this is how we see a lot of our projects. They tend just to work together, is we help make the facilitation of the connection of what it looks like, and we go from there. We also have some projects that do joint actual work together. A good example, I work on a project in the mainframe space, and they have a joint group with the Open Telemetry project that's working on a ZOS Open Telemetry collector. And so that's one there where we work on facilitating between the various two groups and then see how each can best support it. So there's a lot of different models. It just really depends upon what the goals are and what the actual event is, but we're here to help facilitate that as it makes sense.
Okay, so if we want to, or if I would like to do a talk or whatever at the Linux Foundation Energy Conference, I would reach out through you or go direct, or how would I do that best?
Yeah, so I think that event is set. So if you want to do a talk in there, the LF Energy event, I think the call for papers is still open.
Yeah, yes, it is. It ends 25th of May. So,
Yeah.
I have an abstract, and I'm just trying to figure out how to best do this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would just submit the paper in the abstract and just give sort of, context of, where you're related to some of the new Nephos Foundation and what you'd be looking to do there. And just like any papers, they look at those on the merit of what they are, how they fit within the program and things like that, and then make decisions on that front. So,
All right,
and,
cool.
and you
Thanks.
could, yeah, no problem. Good question. Any other questions while I'm on this slide here? Because I know this is kind of always a keen one to for folks to sort of understand how this all fits together. And like I said, this is a model that translates across all of our foundations. Some of them, our foundations don't have a number of technical initiatives. They have one. So like OpenSearch is a good example of this. Whereas opposed to a whole bunch of developer communities, they have one. It's called OpenSearch. So they have a TSC that sits up here, but it's the same overall concept. Is we have a very clean delineation line between how technical community decisions are made of where the technology is going versus where the business and fiduciary side of the house is, and that's done intentionally because we there isn't a concept of because I pay more, I get to have a better voice of where the projects go, or what the directions are. The direction of how the projects go is showing up and doing the work. Like that's full stop of how it works. And that's the way you draw influence there. We're kind of familiar with the participation levels. I only throw this out here because this sort of talks about like on the fiduciary side of what it looks like to potentially engage and kind of it based upon where your organization might potentially be at. Generally speaking, there are three tiers. The associate tier is really one that's more around academic and nonprofit and similar organizations, and it's really more kind of like a co-branding more than anything. The general and premier are sort of the key levels, and I think the way that we tend to see how this works out is, as an organization is starting to look at NeoNephos and the various projects work, the first step is you get involved in the technical communities. You start to understand what the technologies are, where they work for you, how your company benefits from them, where you can leverage them. and then really start to engage at that point there. Where we see sort of membership start to come in, and if you kind of go back to this cycle in here, keeping a lot of this cycle going is where we see sort of like the funding and investments that begin to happen. What we often will see here is companies that, are starting to spend time in these projects. They're seeing a nice value driving from them. They'll invest at a general sponsorship level, which gives them sort of an opportunity to, hey, we're going to drive some funding in here. We're going to show our affiliation here. But in terms of the fiduciary governance side of the house, there's kind of very minimal sort of, areas there. I mean, you can obviously attend TAC meetings, governing board meetings. There's an election for what that looks like. Outreach committees is always welcome, and I think that's a great area for members to always get a part of because there's usually some really nice benefits your companies can leverage from the outreach work. Where we start to see sort of the turning point is at the premier level. So where at the general level, you're like, hey, this is important to us. We want to invest to make sure for the good of these technologies that they have the resources needed to keep driving. Premier is the flip of this is important to us that we want that seat at the table to make sure we're knowing we can help determine where this is driving towards. So we generally see companies that are investing in a number of these initiatives, and or a number of these initiatives are very key to their business, strategy of where they're wanting. So they know that them investing at a higher level means that they have a higher seat of driving where NeoNephos is overall going. So I put up here as not sort of this is the sales pitch because everybody already member, so we've missed that boat. But I think more of just understanding like what we see these levels translating to and how we see organizations tying to it. But I would say the start of all of this is being involved in the project communities. Like that's the sticky value here that is really key for anybody who's investing in this. Because there are membership benefits, but the greatest membership benefit that you get out of this is the engagement and the leveraging of these projects, because that's the piece there that you get so many multipliers of ROI out of. I think with that, that's the slides I had for today. I know this was kind of very high level, but definitely open for any questions that I can help answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. And so in general, we want to publish everything on YouTube to be open as much as possible. If you have questions coming up later, you can always feel free to reach out to us via distribution list and so on, or direct channels on Zulip. I'm happy to talk on feedback, improvements, etc. So maybe last question to that. If not, we can also open the round up for general Q&A towards what we showed today. So feel free to unmute yourself, and if you would like to raise your questions, now's the time.
Hi, Christian. This is Vasu.
Hi.
I just wanted to basically give a short, maybe shout out or something to John's presentation. I think what is also now helping, I just want to bring that context in. If you think about EU regulation about the Cyber Resiliency Act, or more down to earth, the C-level definition. I think one of the things that the EU wants to improve with its push for sovereignty is that we essentially have more control, more ownership down to the source code. And foundations like Linux Foundation, Eclipse, and what we are doing with NeoNephos actually helps you to obtain that part of control, if you think about it. And in order to have that control, this regulations incentivize companies that somehow have a business goal to essentially have developers in place that actually not only contribute to upstream joint projects, yeah, but also have maintenance rights and be active in these communities, more or less. And overall, the European situation is so fragmented that we actually need to find ways to collaborate together to get to that kind of joint control, right? And we essentially started early. Now, we are just a young foundation, and I want to connect this to one criticism that people we heard also on at the NeoNephos booth at the last KubeCon, that everything that we do is currently dominated by SAP. But as you can see, the outreach community, for example, I see Annika in the call. She's taking that over. We have numerous other members also coming forth. And so there is a certain element of altruism in this. I'm trying to also outline the way of thinking why we initiated it, because we also had public taxpayer money to do this, right? So as mentioned, and we, again, this was another question we often heard, why did we choose Linux Foundation? I think, and not why didn't we build our own foundation? Now we're stuck with the bylaws of the Linux Foundation and whatnot. There's so many, criticism. I just want to say, the Linux Foundation is one of the larger open source foundations in the world and has a good track record. And even though you might not like some of the bylaws, they're there for a good reason, because there were maybe some historic use cases or whatnot, right? And we should rather learn from these and not try to reinvent, run into the same problems again, and so on. So yeah, that's kind of my shout out. I think, John, a well-received presentation from you. We sometimes think that these things are not important, but in the end, in a case of conflicts, exactly these kinds of things bite you in the behind. And yeah, all right, that's it.
Thank you for the kind words. I do want to reinforce that, a lot of what we put in place here is all what was driven from the initial formation discussions that came from the various organizations at the onset of this. So, I mean, we try to be very key of that. What we're trying to do is aligned with what the desires of the group overall is looking to do, at the same time aligning with open source best practices and things like that. So, never we try not to have the approach of the LF is telling you to do X. We more of saying, well, your governance is telling you it says this, but let's help understand what you're trying to accomplish and how we can work with you to get the needs. Because at the end of the day, you're the stakeholders that we're wanting to make sure can drive success. And your success is the only way the foundation moves forward.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, with that, are there any additional questions? If not, yeah, as I said, feel free to reach out to us. We are here to help and discuss matters and your feedback. Yeah. Thanks for joining the community call.